Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Ever Living Podcast. I'm
Welcome back, everyone.
and Jessica. Who do we have in our podcast room today?
Yes, so today our guest is another Jessica, Jessica Keating. She is the director for the Notre Dame Office of Life and Human Dignity at the McGrath Institute for Church Life. So, welcome, Jessica.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Thank you. Yeah, we're really glad to have you. And how are you doing today?
A little under the weather, so you'll have to pardon my scratchy throat, but hanging in there in the
No
February
worries.
doldrums.
Absolutely.
Yeah, hope you get better soon.
Yeah, thank you.
So Jessica was our speaker at the March for Life in New Hampshire, right?
Yeah.
Thanks for speaking that day, Jessica.
Yeah, absolutely.
We
It was
learned
a
a
lot
lot
of fun.
about feminism and pro-life. Can you explain to our listeners how those were connected, how those should be connected?
hmm So I think when we first hear the phrase in our contemporary context of pro-life and feminism, we think, well, that's an oxymoron. You can't be both. And in 2017 during the Women's March, which was still the largest, I think, national march in U.S. history, New Wave Feminists, which is sort of an alternative pro-life group, signed up to be a sponsor. And when the organizers found out that they were pro-life, they were taken off of the sponsor list because abortion was sort of a platform of the Women's March. So I think you had a lot of pro-life women stay home from that march. But what was really interesting is that there was sort of a determination made that you can't be pro-life and feminist at the same time. And that's certainly been the trajectory since, the late 60s, early 70s, for the past 50 or so years. But prior to that, and including that time, we have an unbroken history of pro-life feminism, beginning sort of in the contemporary era with Mary Wollstonecraft all the way through sort of the suffragist movement. Indeed, the feminist movement in the 60s split over the issue of abortion, and you had several sort of independently founded pro-life feminist groups, smaller than the National Organization of Women, but yeah. So we have this continuity of thought in our tradition that holds that women's flourishing
Mhm.
cannot be at the expense of children, um, and that indeed abortion is actually a symptom and sign of ongoing oppression rather than a form of liberation.
Yeah, that that's a big concept to for people to grasp. But yeah, that feminism, which would you say is um, like rights for women or like not
Yeah,
being
I think, in the pro life movement, I think there's a tendency to sort of reject feminism, and that's rejecting a feminism, I think, of the 1960s. But I think we have to recover what was good in that movement, in terms of giving women access to their own bank account, their own credit card, being able to move and flourish in new ways in society. And we tend to throw, for lack of a better phrase, the baby out with the bathwater. All feminism is bad because it has become so attached. Mainstream feminism becomes so attached to abortion in the last 50 years. Um, so there are real goods that the feminist movement was pursuing. I think on the flip side, the feminist movement, as it sort of is today in the mainstream, really finds it incomprehensible that you could be a pro-life feminist, that you could, want things like equal pay for equal work, that you could want things that are typically associated with that second wave feminism, and think that abortion is antithetical to women's flourishing. So we have that conflict between two sort of sometimes hardened ideologies, but there are really interesting groups like New Wave Feminism, New Wave Feminists like feminists for life who really sort of defy those stereotypes of being one or the other. In the U.S., I mean, we have a long history of pro-life feminism. In the modern era, we might date that to Mary Wollstonecraft, who's sort of, the godmother of modern feminism. She rejected abortion and advocated for education for women so that they and their children and families and society ultimately could flourish. So the idea of abortion being a problem is situated within a larger vision. She doesn't use this term, of the common good. And then we have the suffragists in the US context around the Civil War really take this up as they're advocating for improvements in women's education, improvements in women's formation, improvements for women's opportunities. And they speak not overwhelmingly, but consistently and frequently about abortion being antithetical to women's full liberation and participation in society.
Yeah.
Who were some of those names that here in the U.S. that participated in that?
So I mean, they're all sort of the famous, first wave feminists. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Maddie Brinkerhoff was an advocate. She has a nice quote that talks about, when a man steals for bread, we assume something is wrong. When a woman destroys her baby, it's a sign of a symptom of a disease in society. Alice Paul, who's a later contemporary and is the first drafter of the Equal Rights Amendment. Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Blackwell. These are all sort of pioneers in feminism, in the first wave feminism, and were all very staunchly pro-life. Elizabeth Blackwell, in fact, became a doctor once she had encountered the practice of abortion in New York City. And she says that when this hell was forced upon her notice, and that it was under the aegis of being a female doctor, she decided she was going to do everything she could to sort of combat that. And, first female doctor in the United States, she did a lot for educating women about cycles, pregnancy safety, real advocate there. But it was her disgust at abortion that really motivated her to become a doctor and an advocate.
I thought that was so interesting because you had talked about that a little bit, I think, at the March for Life. I thought that was so interesting because I had actually read a book back in I think in middle school about Elizabeth Blackwell. And I remember learning about her being the first female doctor in the United States. But I don't think the book even touched on the fact that she was opposed to abortion. So I thought that was interesting.
There's been kind of a whitewashing, I think, when we remember these women. Their stance against abortion has been sort of edited out or explained away as that was of their time. They were worried about, obviously, abortion posed a significant medical risk to women at that time. And so there's sort of a forgetting of how integral this was to their vision of women's flourishing. Yeah, there was actually, I'd have to go look up the reference, but an abortion clinic named the Elizabeth Blackwell Center, and they had to rename it.
Wow.
When they found out that she was not an abortion advocate.
Well, there's cover-up of the good and pro-life parts of their lives, and then also cover-up of the darkness of abortionists and the darkness of population control and the darkness of eugenics. Would you say
Yeah, I think a lot of folks, don't know about the relationship between abortion advocacy and eugenics, or abortion advocacy and population control. The Rockwell Foundation for Population Control still exists. And abortion actually grows out of those two movements. of trying to sort of produce a better human race, for lack of a better term, and real fears about overpopulation. So again, not something we hear about a lot in sort of our contemporary context, although those fears are certainly recurring in the context of climate change. But yeah, there's this real fervor that if we don't limit the population, there will be global catastrophe. And abortion was seen both in the United States but also abroad as an essential piece of controlling the population. And so it gets its feet through, the population control movement and the eugenics movement. It's actually a late incorporation into the women's rights movement.
Right. And
really interesting.
To make abortion part of, to tie it into what they so call what it means to be feminist, it's actually stopping women from choosing life. It's saying you can't support women and not support abortion. That's really silencing women from choosing life, and like saying that motherhood is bad or
incompatible with flourishing.
So that just surprises me that abortion would be part of their platform if it takes away any you can't
and
separate the two.
So in Betty Friedan's, the first edition of the Feminine Mystique, abortion is not mentioned. It is then in the second edition, after she sort of forms and is influenced by a man named Larry Ladder, whose work is cited in the Roe decision several times. He's really one of the architects of American abortion policy. But it certainly creates a challenging position, a pro-choice position, for whatever good intention it has, of making the choice to have a child solely that of the woman. So now she bears all responsibility. It's no longer part of community, part of the relationship with the father. That choice now becomes her responsibility. So if she chooses to have it, well, it's her responsibility to raise and care for that child alone if necessary. So it really allows those around her to sort of excuse themselves from responsibility for new life.
Yeah.
That, and it takes away, I think Cindy's point to I feel like it's the opposite of feminism, right? Because it takes away the most feminine part of being a woman, right? Which is the ability to reproduce, the ability to, bring a child to term and be a mother.
That's right. That's right. It really, Erica Bacchiacchi, who's a feminist lawyer who actually lives right down the road from me, makes the great point that sort of abortion policy and law makes normative a male paradigm, which is the paradigm of not having attachments sort of outside of work, of not being able to carry life to term, of not having sort of these interruptions of dependency and need that take you away from the market. So when we, think about when women say abortion is necessary for women's flourishing, they are saying, in effect, whether they mean to or not, that fertility is an impediment to women. Fertility is a problem to be solved, not a reality to be accommodated. And I think, let's be serious. I mean, pregnancy is really challenging. I emailed you guys earlier today and said I've been feeling really nauseous because I'm pregnant with my second child. And I'm in the third trimester and I'm still really nauseous. And it's hard. And so what does accommodating dependency look like? I think those are serious conversations that we need to have. But I think you're absolutely right. When abortion becomes the platform for feminism, it really makes the male experience of the world the normative experience that women should be having.
Yeah. That
Yeah.
they that fathers can just say, well, this is not going to affect my life. You need to get an abortion, and so it doesn't affect me at all. And like,
I mean, John Paul II, in his writings on women, really makes the point that pregnancy draws on the woman in a way that is incommensurable with what happens to a man. That she, it's her energy, um, it's her body. Things. I mean, your blood volume triples. I think your heart's working harder. I mean, pregnancy is tough on the body, and that kind of reality, men are just not going to have that experience of the body being under such stress, or like the amazement of giving birth to a child, but that requires special protection and special not just accommodation, but sort of celebration, making room for this reality in the public space, in the family, in the economy, in our education system. So at all levels of policy and public life.
yeah.
Absolutely. So speaking of that, I'm curious. So, obviously you know a lot about pro-life feminism, which is so wonderful. But I would love to hear a little bit more just about your role at Notre Dame and
Sure.
what you're working on, and does it relate to policy and kind of trying to find different ways that we can accommodate for mothers.
Yeah, so my role as the director of the Office of Life and Human Dignity is to develop programming that forms. It's primarily, our institute is primarily oriented toward outreach to the Catholic Church. So our work primarily looks at forming pastoral leaders and educators to develop sort of a worldview that is consistently and authentically pro-life, and to be able to develop cultures of human dignity, which would certainly include policy, but also include practices, both in the home, in communities, in churches, that uplift the sanctity of life and the dignity of all peoples. So we are not directly involved sort of in legislative efforts and policy drafting, but it is something I think about. You know, I often hear chatter about, people aren't having children because they are caught up in sort of this me first mentality that's so common. And well, I think part of that is true. Part of it is that people can't afford to have children anymore. The cost of daycare, the cost of raising a child, sending a child to college, I mean, that does factor into and surveying shows this, factor into a couple's decision to either have more children or have children at all. And that to me is tragic, that we as a society can't make room. We want more people. We want another generation. The economy requires it, but we make it it's so difficult for families to sort of pay. It's a high price tag, literally, to have children. Now, people do it, and there are ways to do it, but couldn't we make it a little bit easier, to encourage folks to have children? And certainly, it's a factor we know from research data on why women choose to get abortions. Most women who have abortions are already mothers and cite some kind of financial concern as a rationale for abortion. So I think addressing some of that positively in our public policy, in addition to laws limiting abortion, is essential.
Yeah. Do you see the younger generation like choosing life, choosing families, choosing parenthood? What do you think the
I mean, there's
trend?
an overall decline in um, uh, couples of childbearing age having children.
Okay.
So I think right now we are slipping below replacement rate.
Isn't it a 2.1% replacement rate? Like every woman would have to have at least. It's funny because it's like 2.1. It's like
What's
one
point one of a
point
child?
one. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So I think that certainly there is a movement in some areas of the church to really embrace a large family, which some people are certainly called to. But I think overall, that is not sufficient to sort of reverse the trend, right? And in the U.S. population decline overall.
Yeah.
So I'm
Um,
curious, what, like, obviously this is a problem. So, do you have any thoughts on like how do we change culture to, I know that's like that's what we're all trying to figure out, right? But like, how do so? But do you have any like, and in your work or anything, like, do you have any thoughts of like steps that we can take as in the church, in the Catholic Church, and just as a society to work towards encouraging a culture of life and family?
yeah, I think the USCCB does tremendous work advocating for legislation. I think that Catholic Church state conferences all around the country are doing amazing work advocating in their local context for legislative change. I think that first it's going to be very specific. Now that Roe has been overturned, states really vary drastically on what their policies are. So you have, New York, California, Maryland, and then you have Texas, Louisiana, South Dakota, other states where the laws are much more restrictive. And so that's gonna in some set priorities. But I think that removing barriers is a really essential piece. So in addition to limiting access to abortion, providing real tangible signs that remove barriers for people welcoming children. And I mentioned one of those already. I mean, childcare. Most people are paying, more for childcare than they do for rent or their mortgage. I mean, it's absolutely astronomical. Here in Massachusetts, we have a very reasonable childcare. I mean, it's another mortgage. And so finding ways to lower that burden. And it's been a huge jump since, the 90s. The 90s, I think there's been something like a 250% increase in childcare costs across the nation. So I think that's a huge one. I think comprehensive women's health, I would really like to see sort of more pro-woman, pro-life medical practices that provide, the full range of women's care services, not abortion, but sort of everything else. Because that's part of building a culture of life, is providing authentic medical care for women that isn't automatically putting them on the pill at 15. So I think that's a really important piece. And I think that one thing we need to think about seriously in our national context, and certainly there are states that are better in this than others, is maternal mortality and how to comprehensively address maternal mortality rates. Now, there's some disagreement about what the numbers actually mean and say, but the U.S. maternal mortality rate is nevertheless much higher than other developed nations. So how do we address that question? But then I think there are softer forms of cultural change. And you do have examples of places like Sweden and other countries in the EU that have amazing policies of not only for universal childcare, not only great maternal health outcomes, but these very generous maternity and paternity leaves, which again is another real lacuna for us here in the States. But people are still not having babies. And so I think that's where where we need to sort of get creative. I don't have a silver bullet, answer to that. I think that's kind of the slower work of cultural change, that we've had these policies in place for so long.
Mm-hmm.
It is going to take time to sort of undo the softer forms of cultural effect that they have had. But I certainly think being able to talk to others, to talk to people who disagree with you, is an essential piece to sort of shifting the cultural narrative about being pro-life and being feminist.
Yeah, and I think encouraging the idea that family policy can be a bipartisan
Yes.
concept is also
Mm-hmm.
really important, because so yesterday I attended a press conference for Connecticut, where I live, their reproductive rights caucus,
Mm-hmm.
and just wanted to hear what they were talking about and what legislation they were thinking about putting forward this session. And what's happening is the same people that are putting forward, legislation to expand access to abortion are also the ones putting forward the family policy legislation, right? So
Yeah,
that's, expanding the child tax credit, all that. And like, stuff like that, expanding the child tax credit or access to free diapers, things like that. Like, those are great family policies. I think. I
that's
think we
right.
just need to encourage Republicans and Democrats and independents all to work together, and
It's a
and
real
still face the
opportunity
boundaries.
for, I think, low hanging fruit bipartisan wins. I mean, these policies are incredibly popular, they're needed, and they are something that, regardless of your stance on abortion, you should be able to get behind.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great point.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that to support women, support mothers, um, it doesn't mean that we should promote abortion as the best choice. That to support them, actually um, support them to be mothers, support them to
That's
to
right.
raise their kids, to not be alone in this.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, abortion
Well,
is never the answer we want to sort of put forward as the model. But yeah, finding ways to support women and families who are um, trying to raise children in sometimes very difficult circumstances, um, in their roles as women and mothers. I think there's sort of this great tension that women who are mothers feel, to not be a mother when you're at work, and then only be a mother when your kids are home. So you get sort of this bifurcated sense of personhood. And the reality is most women have to work now. I mean, that just is the reality. You're very fortunate if you you either live in a less expensive part of the country, or you're very fortunate to be able to have a single family income. So how do we sort of think about even our work policies that can accommodate the reality that I don't stop being a mother when I'm at work? I
yeah.
still might get a call that I have to come pick up a child. I still might have my child home with me because daycare is closed. So there are all of these ways that we can think of work policy as well.
Yeah. And I
Absolutely. Yeah.
and I also think of like to be feminist to support women, like how could that lead to the cutting short of a female human's life in the womb? Like how could those be linked? Like how can you say like you support women, you want to protect them, you want to give them all the opportunities in life, and then also that that if it's linked to abortion, that means a woman's life
Like,
Right.
is ending.
preborn babies aren't having,
Like,
they're not
yeah,
That's
preborn
right.
girls aren't having a right to
they're
life, which is
they're
not
not
giving them
That's
rights.
right.
they're not
And
reaching 1 year of life. Like you're stopping that like right there. Like
Yeah.
how could
Alice Paul noted that she was, I believe, still alive when the Equal Rights Amendment, the one that we have in place now, was either being drafted or voted upon. And she said something, I'm paraphrasing, along the lines of, how can you be for the equal rights of women when we're destroying, women, girls in the womb? That there's just something that rubs against common sense there.
Mhm.
That this idea that feminism should mandate the the ability to kill your children is just a perversion of the feminism of the first wave feminism of the 18 and 1900s, and certainly of Alice Paul, who found it rather abhorrent.
Yeah.
Seems like the tactics of, the enemy, right? The capital E enemy that wants to. Well, that leads to your Bible verse, doesn't it, Jessica?
Oh, yes, my Bible verse. So my Bible verse is from John 10:10b, and it's in the context of the Good Shepherd discourse, in which Jesus says to his disciples, "I come that you might have life and have it abundantly." And I love this passage because in addition, to my work at Notre Dame, I am involved, or have been historically involved, in Catechesis of the Good Shepherd, which is a program of catechesis for young children. And this is a Bible verse that we reflect on in the context of that space, and this idea of abundant life, and sort of thinking about, obviously, in the context of the Good Shepherd, it is that Jesus gives us his life through his death. But even thinking about how can we reframe some of these debates to think more about abundant life and human flourishing, rather than reducing them to sort of autonomy and rights-based arguments. Doesn't mean that doesn't have a place, but what if our frames, so for thinking about this, were shifted to the notion of abundant life, of flourishing in community, in families, in schools, etc.
Yeah.
I love that. That's beautiful. Yeah, that's so true. I think maybe things would be different if we everybody looked at life that way and exactly looked at policy and culture as wanting to flourish. So Well, Jessica, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And how can people follow your work? You're doing great work at Notre Dame. How can people contact you?
Yeah, you can look me up on the McGrath Institute faculty staff webpage. I have a couple articles that I think are going to get linked in to follow some of the things I've written on abortion and feminism. And yeah, if you're a Catholic educator, we hold summer conferences for Catholic educators, and you can follow our work also by signing up we host a webinar series called Conversations That Matter every semester. And this semester is going to be on dying well, so physician-assisted suicide and human dignity at the end of life. So that'll be really exciting. So
awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Have a wonderful pregnancy
Thank
journey
you.
remaining.
It feels like a long time and a very short time.
Yeah.
There's a lot to get done.
One of my friends said the same thing to me today. She's about halfway through, and she said the same exact thing. She said it feels like a long time, but also such a short time. So That's so funny you just said that. But, well, we'll be praying for you, and
Thank you.
I hope you feel better, too.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you for having me on. It's been great to be with you.
Awesome. Great to talk to you.
Right.
All right, everybody.
Talk to you later, everyone. Bye. See you next week.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Ever Living Podcast, a podcast by New Hampshire Right-to-Life, New Hampshire's oldest and most active pro-life organization. You can learn more about our work and learn how to get involved at www.nhrtl.org. If you would like to donate to our mission, you can make a donation at www.nhrtl.org/donate. See you next week. May God bless you and be very near to you, and may you be ever living.